He was soaked, broke, and ready to give up, until a janitor opened a basement door and changed everything. Decades later, Keanu Reeves stood at that same door, holding a gift no one saw coming. But what secret did that janitor keep hidden all those years, and why did Keanu never forget him? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain was relentless. It slammed against the pavement like it had something to prove, each drop cold enough to sting as it soaked through Keanu Reeves's thin jacket. He pulled the collar higher, but it was no use. Water ran down the back of his neck and collected in his shoes, squishing with every tired step. His hair clung to his forehead, heavy with rain and exhaustion. The streets of Manhattan had never felt so endless or so empty. It was past midnight, and the city had closed in on itself. Stores were shut, the steam from underground grates danced like ghosts, and the last subway had groaned away 30 minutes ago. Keanu kept walking. He had nowhere to be. Hours earlier, he had returned home to his rental apartment, a place barely livable, with walls that always seemed to be sweating and a door that stuck when it rained. Only this time, the key didn't work. It had jammed, snapped in the lock, and the landlord hadn't returned his calls in days. Then, to make matters worse, a thief had brushed past him on the street and taken his wallet in a blink. No money, no ID, no shelter. And the timing couldn't have been crueler. A year ago, River Phoenix had died. It still sat like a weight in Keanu's chest, something he couldn't talk about, not even to himself. He hadn't been okay since. Work was unraveling. The indie film he'd poured himself into had collapsed during post-production. He'd turned down safer, big-budget roles to do something meaningful, something that mattered. Now the producers had vanished, and the project was dead. The studios weren't returning his calls. He hadn't told anyone how bad things had gotten. He was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't supposed to need help. But here he was, wet, cold, and walking in circles. The only heat left in his body came from the anger he felt toward himself. He had 29 years behind him, and tonight, they all felt wasted. The sidewalk gleamed under the streetlights, puddles reflecting his blurred face. He felt like a shadow of a person, lost in a city too big to notice. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a slow rumble of thunder. Keanu paused under the small awning of a closed deli, trying to catch his breath. His hands trembled from the cold. He pressed his back against the brick and tried to think. He considered calling someone. But who? He'd distanced himself from almost everyone. Pride had done that. So had pain. The thought of reaching out now felt heavier than the storm itself. He looked up at the gray sky, blinked the rain from his eyes, and stepped back into the night. He didn't know it yet, but the light he was about to see, the faint, flickering glow from the basement window of an old office building, was the beginning of something he'd never forget. The building looked abandoned at first. It stood at the corner of a quiet street, surrounded by rusted scaffolding and cracked pavement. Most of the windows were dark, but near the bottom, half buried beneath sidewalk level, one small window glowed faintly, yellow and warm like the last ember in a dying fire. Keanu stopped walking. The window was fogged on the inside, probably from heat. He wiped his sleeve across his face and bent to peer through the glass. Inside, a man was mopping the floor. He moved slowly, methodically, humming softly to himself. He looked to be in his 60s, with a round back and a quiet kind of presence. His clothes were a faded blue uniform. His shoes squeaked with each step. Keanu stayed there, still as stone, watching. There was something peaceful about the scene. This man was alone, working past midnight in a place no one noticed, and yet he carried himself like it mattered, like cleaning that floor had purpose. The mop glided across the tile in wide arcs, and the man never stopped humming. A gentle tune, something soulful, something that made the storm outside feel distant. Then, suddenly, the man stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the window. And then they found Keanu. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Keanu felt his breath catch. He looked away, embarrassed, ready to back away into the rain. But before he could, the man smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a stranger on the street. This was something warmer, something real. The man raised his hand and pointed toward a metal door at the side of the building. Then he nodded as if to say, "Come on, it's all right." Keanu shook his head, unsure, then took a step back. The man smiled again and pointed once more, this time slower, more insistent. He nodded again. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Not out of obligation, but something deeper, like he recognized the storm Keanu was carrying inside. Another gust of wind hit, cold enough to steal the air from Keanu's lungs. The rain stung his ears. He looked at the door, then at the man, then at the sidewalk behind him. And finally, quietly, he walked toward the door. When he reached it, he hesitated. It creaked slightly, then swung open before he could knock. The janitor stood in the doorway holding a steaming paper cup. "You look like you could use a warm drink and a dry place to sit," he said softly. Keanu opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he nodded. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. The warmth hit him like a wave. For the first time in hours, he felt something close to relief. The man closed the door gently behind them. "I'm Franklin," he said. "Keanu," came the quiet reply. Franklin led Keanu down a narrow staircase into the basement. It wasn't much. Just a small break room with 2 old chairs, a tiny table, and a coffee pot perched on a metal counter. A mop leaned against the wall near a shelf of cleaning supplies. The fluorescent light buzzed gently overhead, but it was warm here, and clean. The smell of fresh soap still lingered from Franklin's work. Keanu stood awkwardly near the doorway, dripping water onto the tile. "You're soaked to the bone," Franklin said, reaching into a wooden locker against the far wall. "Here." He pulled out a folded sweatshirt and a pair of faded sweatpants. "They're big but dry. You can change in there." He nodded toward a utility closet. Keanu hesitated, then accepted the clothes. He didn't say much, just nodded a quiet thank you and stepped away to change. When he returned, he looked a little less ghost-like. His hair was still wet, but at least he wasn't shivering. Franklin handed him the cup of coffee. Keanu took it with both hands and wrapped his fingers around the heat. "This means more than you know," he said, voice low and tired. Franklin sat across from him and smiled. "Everyone needs a safe place now and then. That storm out there doesn't care who you are." Keanu sipped the coffee. It was bitter and strong, but it felt like comfort. He looked around the room. Plain, lived in, full of tiny signs that someone cared. A picture on the wall showed a woman with bright eyes and a proud, joyful smile. "That's my Marie," Franklin said, following his gaze. "Gone 5 years now. Cancer took her too quick." "I'm sorry," Keanu said. "She was the strong one," Franklin continued, tapping the picture lightly. "Security guard for 28 years, never missed a day. Said kindness was the one thing you could give without running out." Keanu's eyes drifted to another photo. This one of a young woman and a little boy. The woman looked tired but happy. The boy couldn't have been more than 5, with the same eyes as Franklin. "My daughter Angela and my grandson Caleb," Franklin said. "Angela works double shifts as a nurse now, lost her husband a while back. That little boy, he's 9 now, loves to draw, wants to be an artist." Keanu smiled faintly. "He's lucky to have you." Franklin chuckled. "I don't know about lucky, but I do what I can. Save what little I've got so he can go to a good school someday. Angela's got big dreams for that boy." The two sat in silence for a while. Outside, the rain hammered the sidewalk like a steady drum. "I don't usually let strangers in," Franklin said eventually. "But something about you tonight, I don't know. You looked like a man who needed to know the world still has good people in it." Keanu stared into his cup. He didn't say it, but he felt it. This was the first act of kindness he'd felt in a very long time. Franklin stood up and moved to a small fridge tucked behind the mop closet. "Almost forgot," he said, opening the door. "Marie used to tell me, always pack 2 sandwiches. You never know who the second one might be for." He pulled out a peanut butter sandwich wrapped neatly in plastic and handed it to Keanu. "It's not much," Franklin said, "but it'll get something warm in your belly." Keanu took it slowly, his fingers brushing the edges of the sandwich like it was fragile. "Thank you," he said. The words came out hoarse, like they hadn't been used in a while. He peeled back the plastic and took a bite. The taste was simple, peanut butter and white bread, but to him, it might as well have been a feast. The warmth of the coffee and the food hit him all at once, and with it came a wave of emotion he hadn't been expecting. He swallowed hard, then stared down at the table. "You know," he said softly, "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Franklin gave a small nod. "I figured." There was no judgment in his voice, just understanding. Keanu took another bite, then rested the sandwich on a napkin. "I don't know why I'm here," he said after a long pause. "Not here in your break room. I mean, here. In this city. In this life. It used to make sense." Franklin didn't interrupt. "I had this best friend," Keanu continued, voice tightening. "River. He passed away last year. It broke something in me." He let the words hang there. The storm outside had softened to a drizzle, like even the sky was listening. "I thought I was okay," Keanu said. "I kept working, took a small film, tried to make it mean something. Something for him, for me. But it fell apart. Everything did. I turned down other projects, ones that could have helped me stay afloat. I thought I was choosing art, choosing purpose. Turns out, I was just choosing loneliness." Franklin folded his hands on the table. Keanu looked up. "I'm not trying to sound dramatic. I haven't told anyone any of this." Franklin's eyes were steady. "You don't sound dramatic," he said. "You sound like someone who's been carrying too much without a place to put it down." Keanu exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. "You ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" he asked. "All the time," Franklin replied. "But that feeling usually means you're on the edge of something important. Most people give up before they reach it. The trick is to just keep walking." Keanu looked down at the sandwich again. He nodded slowly. Keanu leaned back slightly in the chair, cradling the coffee cup in both hands. "I've always believed stories could change people," he said. "Movies, books, even a single line from a script. But lately, I don't know. Maybe the world doesn't care about stories anymore." Franklin tilted his head. "The world doesn't care who you are," he said calmly, "but kindness does." Keanu looked up, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. Franklin continued, "The world keeps spinning no matter what you do. Doesn't matter if you're rich or broke, famous or forgotten. But kindness? Kindness stops time. It listens. It sees you." There was a silence after that, a good kind, the kind that fills the room without needing sound. Keanu took another bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly. "I used to think success would feel different," he said. "I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough roles, made the right choices, it would fix everything inside." "And?" Franklin asked. "It didn't," Keanu answered. "I still feel like that 17-year-old kid riding buses to auditions. Only now there's more pressure and fewer places to hide." Franklin nodded, as if he'd heard it all before in 100 different ways. "I know something about that," he said. "Marie used to say, the outside changes, the inside takes longer. I've been mopping these floors for 32 years, seen companies come and go, new owners, new bosses, but when I close my eyes at night, I still hear her laugh, and I still worry about my grandson's future." Keanu smiled a little. "Caleb, right?" "That's him," Franklin said proudly. "Smart as anything, draws like a dream. He sketches little spaceships and cities in the clouds. Said he wants to paint things that make people feel like they belong. Sounds incredible, Keanu said. Hell is, Franklin replied. But his mom's worn thin working hospital shifts, and I've only got so many hours left in these knees. That boy deserves more than we can give him. Still, we try. Save what we can. Teach him to care about people. Keanu nodded slowly, and his voice grew softer. That's what River did for me, he said. He saw the parts of me I kept hidden, the parts I thought weren't enough. He always reminded me that the world didn't have to be cold, that I didn't have to be alone in it. Franklin didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he quietly reached over to the counter and picked up an old pencil and a folded notepad. Here, he said. Write something down. Keanu blinked. What do you mean? Whatever's on your mind, Franklin said. Write it before you forget how it feels. Keanu hesitated, then took the pencil. On the edge of the notepad, he scribbled a single sentence. I don't know where I'm going, but tonight I feel seen. The storm had quieted by the time the clock on the wall read 4:12 a.m. Keanu was still seated, his legs tucked under him, the empty coffee cup resting on the table. His eyes were heavy, not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Release. The kind that only comes after carrying too much for too long. Franklin stood by the mop sink now, folding towels with practiced hands. You don't have to stay much longer, he said gently. Sun'll be up soon. You might catch the first bus if you head a few blocks east. Keanu nodded, though part of him didn't want to move at all. Franklin turned back toward him, reaching into his back pocket. I want you to take something, he said. Keanu sat up straighter. You've already done more than enough. Franklin opened his hand. Inside was a folded $20 bill, soft and worn around the edges. Use this for food, or a ride, or a phone call. I don't know, whatever comes first. Keanu shook his head, already resisting. I can't take your money. You've got a grandson, a daughter. You need it more than I do. Franklin smiled. Son, $20 won't send Caleb to art school, but it might be the thing that gets you to tomorrow. And maybe tomorrow is where everything changes. Keanu's throat tightened. He reached forward and took the bill with both hands, as if it were something sacred. I'll pay you back, he said softly. You will, Franklin replied, but not to me. You'll pay it back when it matters. The room went quiet again. Keanu reached into his jacket, damp and wrinkled from the rain, and pulled out a small pocket notebook. From the back pages, he tore a clean corner and borrowed Franklin's pencil. What's that? Franklin asked. Your number and address, Keanu said. If you don't mind. Franklin chuckled. Not at all. He dictated it while Keanu scribbled carefully. Then Keanu tucked the paper into the inside flap of his notebook, right beside a wrinkled photo of River Phoenix he always kept close. When it was time to leave, Franklin walked him to the side door. The city beyond was still and gray, the storm now a mist that clung to the streets like steam. Thank you, Keanu said one last time. Franklin nodded. Be safe. And remember what I said. Kindness always notices, even when the world does. Keanu stepped out into the morning and paused. The $20 bill was in his pocket. His clothes were too big, his shoes still wet. But he walked forward with a different posture. Something had shifted. He didn't know it yet, but that night in a janitor's break room had just planted a seed. A quiet promise. One act of kindness that would grow into something far bigger than either man could imagine. The months that followed were a blur. Keanu found himself drifting back into the rhythm of the industry, pulled by the inertia of auditions, casting meetings, and travel. Just a few weeks after that stormy night, he landed a role that would change the trajectory of his career. Speed. He read the script, still half expecting it to fall through. But it didn't. The movie exploded. Overnight, he was no longer just the soft-spoken guy from Parenthood or My Own Private Idaho. He was something else now. A star. But not once did he feel like one. On red carpets, his smile was polite but distant, During interviews, he answered every question carefully, always leaning towards sincerity, never ego. And in the quiet moments between, when the hotel rooms were empty and the cameras gone, his mind drifted back to that basement room, that quiet break room in the belly of a forgotten building, that $20 bill tucked between notebook pages, the warmth of coffee, the steady hum of Franklin's voice. He'd tried to call the number Franklin had given him once during the post-production of Speed. He waited until 2 in the morning when the adrenaline had worn off and the silence in his rented suite felt unbearable. He dialed the number and listened to the line ring 5 times before a recorded message played. The number had been disconnected. He tried again a month later, still nothing. Then Christmas came. He sent a card, simple and handwritten. It read, "Dear Franklin, I hope you and Caleb are well. I think about that night often. Thank you again for everything. I still plan to pay you back when it matters. With love, Keanu." He mailed it to the address Franklin had given him. But weeks passed, then months, no reply. He thought maybe the card got lost. Or maybe Franklin had moved. Maybe he'd tossed it away, not recognizing the handwriting. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Still, Keanu kept the journal entry from that night pressed between its pages. "Film gave me peace. I owe him more than I can explain." Fame grew like a wave, but Keanu never stopped thinking about the janitor, who let him rest beneath the storm. As Speed opened worldwide and money flooded in, Keanu quietly donated to shelters and food banks in Los Angeles and New York. He never told anyone why. He just did it, like he was paying toward a debt only he remembered. In interviews, he started using phrases Franklin had once said. When a journalist asked him what he believed success meant, Keanu said, "Kindness always notices, even when the world does." It wasn't planned. The words just came out, and as they echoed in the room, he remembered exactly where he'd first heard them. By 1997, Keanu Reeves had everything the industry said he should want. Box office hits, magazine covers, money, fame, access. But the more it piled up, the emptier he felt inside. He kept working, partly because it distracted him from the loneliness that fame only seemed to deepen. But no matter how far he traveled, no matter how many scripts crossed his desk, he never forgot the night in that basement. Franklin's voice was still with him, like a compass. Steady, grounded, honest. There were days he wondered if maybe Franklin was just a dream, a moment too good for the real world. But then he would open his journal and reread that same sentence. "He gave me peace. I owe him more than I can explain." Keanu started carrying the notebook with him more often. It wasn't a habit, it was an anchor. Between takes, on planes, backstage at interviews, he would sometimes run his thumb across the worn paper where Franklin's address used to be. It had faded now from friction. Still, he didn't rewrite it. He liked that it was becoming part of the page. Then came The Matrix. It was bigger than anything he'd ever done. The scope, the responsibility, the pressure. It felt surreal. Everyone around him talked about legacy, revolutionizing cinema, redefining action films. And while he gave everything to the role, every ounce of discipline and belief he had left, part of him still felt disconnected from all the praise. The week The Matrix premiered, he returned to New York for press. Between interviews, he asked his driver to take him to the old building, the one where Franklin had let him in that stormy night. He didn't say why, he just gave the address from memory. The block had changed. New signs, renovated buildings, coffee shops that hadn't been there before. But the old structure was still standing. A fresh coat of paint covered the brick, but the side door was the same. The same small awning hung over it. The basement window, where their eyes had first met through the storm, was now covered by a thick curtain. Keanu stepped out of the car and stood across the street, hands in his pockets. He watched the building for several minutes, hoping for something, anything. No one came to the door. The window remained still. He thought about knocking, but he didn't. Instead, he stood there quietly and whispered aloud to no one, "Thank you, Franklin, I haven't forgotten." Back at the hotel that night, he pulled out the journal again. This time, he wrote something new. "Fame is loud, but kindness is the thing I hear when the world goes silent." He closed the journal and placed it under his pillow before falling asleep. Keanu's public image kept growing, but his private world stayed quiet. He became known for turning down luxury. No mansion in Beverly Hills, no bodyguards, no flashy lifestyle. He rode the subway. He sat alone on park benches. He gave away millions to crew members and charities, quietly, without press releases. And when asked about it, he always gave the same shrug. "I've had help in my life. I just want to pass some of it forward." No one knew where that help came from. No one but him. During interviews, when actors were asked about their mentors or biggest inspirations, Keanu rarely gave the expected names. Directors, co-stars, legends. He appreciated them, respected them. But he always drifted to a different memory when that question came up. One time, during a quiet conversation with a young journalist in Toronto, he was asked, "What was the moment that changed your life the most?" Keanu paused for a long time. Then he said softly, "A man once gave me coffee, dry clothes, and a peanut butter sandwich. That night saved me. Not because I needed food, but because I needed to know people like him still existed." The journalist blinked. Who was he? Keanu just smiled and said, "Someone who believed in helping strangers." The quote never made it to print. It was buried beneath promotional buzz and box office projections. But for Keanu, it was the truest thing he'd said that year. Sometimes, during long film shoots, when the days blurred together, he'd take out his notebook and trace over the entry from that night. He never changed the words. He never added details. But he would press the pencil gently over the old lines, making them darker again. One day in 1999, just after The Matrix had wrapped and was being edited, Keanu visited a bookstore in New York. He walked alone, hoodie pulled low, trying to disappear into the rhythm of the city. He found a blank leather journal on the back shelf, brown, stitched by hand, thick with cream-colored pages. He bought it without hesitation and walked to a nearby bench under a tree. He opened the front cover and wrote only one sentence on the first page. "When I find him again, I'll tell him everything he started." He closed the book and sat there for a long time, watching the wind stir the leaves. He didn't know where Franklin was. He didn't know if he was still mopping floors or sitting beside Caleb as the boy drew pictures of spaceships. He didn't even know if he was still alive. But he knew this. Someday, somehow, he would pay him back. And not just in dollars. In dignity, in honor, in something that could grow beyond the stormy night they shared. By the time the world entered a new millennium, Keanu Reeves had built a career few could match. Yet with each passing year, a single name kept rising in his mind like an unfinished sentence. Franklin Dorsey. He had everything now. The wealth, the reach, connections, but none of it brought him any closer to the man who gave him shelter when he had nothing. In early 2000, Keanu decided it was time. He sat in his Los Angeles home, flipping through the old journal. The edges were frayed now, the pages warped from years of travel. But there, in the center, was still that folded square of currency. Creased, delicate, and untouched. The same $20 bill Franklin had handed him under flickering basement lights. He held it between his fingers, then picked up the phone. Within a week, a private investigator had been quietly hired. Discretion was key. Keanu didn't want press. He didn't want people knowing. This wasn't a publicity gesture. This was personal. The investigator's name was Arthur Klein, a retired detective with a soft voice and sharp instincts. Keanu gave him everything he remembered: Franklin's name, the building address, the night, the story. Klein got to work. Weeks passed. The first update came in the form of silence. The old office building in Manhattan, where Franklin had once worked, had been sold in 1998, then renovated into creative co-working spaces. The original custodial staff was let go during the transition. No personnel files remained. The janitorial services had been contracted through a now-defunct agency. Klein pressed further. He tracked down the old agency's last known office. It was shuttered. The owner had passed away in 2001. No digital records survived the transition into the new century. Next came city records, retirement filings, pensions, housing information. Franklin Dorsey had officially retired in 1997, but his trail vanished soon after. No address, no bank filings, no medical records, no obituary. It was as if Franklin had chosen to disappear, or had been forgotten by the world he'd quietly served. Keanu read the report in silence. It felt like the kind of ending Franklin himself might have accepted. A quiet exit, no fanfare, just a man stepping away from the noise. But Keanu couldn't accept that. He asked Arthur to keep going. Shift the search, look for Franklin's daughter Angela and grandson Caleb. Even the smallest detail could help. A school, a former employer, a change of asset record, anything. Arthur agreed, though his tone was more cautious now. A month later, he reported back again. Still nothing. Angela Dorsey didn't appear in any active voter rolls. No property records, no listed phone number. If she had married and changed her name, there was no traceable link. As for Caleb, the last known detail was a public school registration under the name Caleb Dorsey, age 8, dated 1994. But there was no follow-up, no graduation listing, no recent public mentions. Every path turned to dust. Keanu sat in his trailer between scenes, the script for his next film open on the table, but his eyes weren't on the lines. They were on a single page torn from Arthur Klein's latest report. It read like a ghost trail, names with no faces, addresses with no doors. He had resources now, more than most, but money couldn't find someone who didn't want to be found. And fame couldn't unlock a silence that had been sealed by time. Still, he refused to stop. He reached out to his assistant, Marisol, someone he trusted deeply. She had been with him for years, known for her efficiency, but more importantly for her heart. He told her everything: the storm, the janitor, the sandwich, the folded bill. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. When he was done, she said quietly, "Let's find them." Together, they combed through every drawer in the journal, every archived box from his New York years, every piece of correspondence he had saved. There wasn't much, but he refused to believe that was the end of it. Marisol cross-referenced phone books from the early 90s. She ran Angela Dorsey's name through yearbooks, school alumni lists, even old employment databases. Nothing came up. They tried community centers, local churches, even art contests, wondering if Caleb, the aspiring artist, had ever submitted a drawing somewhere that left a trace. But even there, the leads collapsed. Keanu began questioning his memory. Had he written the address down wrong? Had he misheard the surname? Marisol reassured him. People move, records vanish, but stories stay. He nodded, but a weight pressed heavier on his chest. That night, Keanu found himself alone in his home again. The house was quiet. Outside, the wind shook the trees, and the city moved on as if no one had ever gone missing. He sat at his desk and opened the journal again. The page with Franklin's address was yellow now, its ink faded but still visible. He traced the lines with his finger like he was reading Braille, and then he opened the flap at the back, the hidden compartment he hadn't touched in years. The $20 bill was still there, perfectly folded. He placed it on the table and stared at it under the lamplight. It looked so small, just a thin slip of paper, but to him, it might as well have been gold. He picked up a pen and wrote on a new page, "I haven't forgotten, and I never will. This isn't about repaying a favor. This is about honoring a moment that saved my soul." The next morning, he asked Marisol to reach out to journalists, not for a press story, but to quietly ask around. Had anyone ever written about a janitor named Franklin in the 90s? A man with a daughter named Angela? A grandson named Caleb? Some stories needed the right eyes to see them. Keanu hoped someone, somewhere, still remembered. Weeks turned into months, and still no word. The search reached into corners of the city and beyond, but each thread unraveled just as quickly as it was found. Names matched, then didn't. Faces led to dead ends. People remembered fragments, vague stories of a kind man who used to sweep floors downtown, but nothing solid, nothing real. Keanu started to feel the ache of time slipping by. He took breaks from filming. He scaled back interviews. Behind the scenes, he became more reflective. And every now and then, he'd glance at the $20 bill sitting quietly in the frame on his shelf. It hadn't left his sight in over 10 years. That one folded bill had become something sacred, a promise frozen in time. Franklin's voice echoed through it, like a whisper from the past. "You'll pay me back when it matters." What did that even mean anymore? The world had changed since that rainy night in '93, so had Keanu. He wasn't the soaking wet young man anymore, broken and unsure. He was someone millions looked up to now, someone people assumed had everything. But deep down, he still felt like a man standing in a hallway, waiting for someone to open a door. One night, while reviewing Franklin's file for the 100th time, Keanu paused. There was a photo Arthur Klein had taken, an image of the renovated building, now home to a podcast studio and 2 design agencies. It looked so different. Yet something about the windows. Keanu printed it out, grabbed a pen, and circled the small basement window in the corner. Then he flipped the photo over and wrote on the back, "This is where everything changed. This is where kindness found me." He tucked it into his journal and sighed. Even without answers, he wasn't ready to stop. Marisol suggested trying one more avenue. She had contacts in local nonprofit organizations that worked with retired custodial staff, especially those who'd fallen through the cracks after retirement. "Someone might remember him," she said, "not from files, but from friendship." Keanu agreed. Together, they sent out handwritten letters to 20 different organizations across the boroughs, sharing only the details that mattered. Franklin's name, his role, the year he retired, the kindness he offered a stranger in a storm. They waited. Nothing came, but Keanu didn't get discouraged. He believed the universe worked on its own clock. That maybe Franklin had left, yes, but not without leaving something behind. A trail, a ripple, something. Until then, all he could do was hold on to what he had. A memory, a name, a promise made under humming fluorescent lights, and the $20 bill still folded, still waiting. By the time 2005 arrived, Keanu's career was still thriving on the surface, but his personal life had unraveled in ways few could fully grasp. Years earlier, in 1999, he and Jennifer Syme had lost their daughter, Ava, who was stillborn at 8 months. The grief was immediate, sharp and deep, but Keanu, ever private, carried it quietly. Then in 2001, tragedy struck again. Jennifer died in a car accident, just weeks after they'd reconnected. The weight of both losses collapsed the scaffolding he had carefully built around his heart. Now, years later, the pain hadn't faded. It had just settled in, quietly rearranging the man he had once been. He stopped attending premieres, turned down major projects, avoided red carpets. The public began to wonder where he had gone, but he hadn't gone far. Keanu spent much of his time at home, alone, walking or riding the subway anonymously, and in those silent stretches of isolation, he began rereading his journals more frequently. One night, unable to sleep, he opened to the page that had always called to him, Franklin's page. He ran his fingers over the same lines again, the water-stained edges, the fold marks, the phrase that had rooted itself deep in his mind. You'll pay me back when it matters." He read it over and over, then closed his eyes and whispered aloud, "I'm trying, Franklin. I'm still trying." Despite the grief, or maybe because of it, Keanu started quietly giving. Not to foundations that sent back tax receipts or plaques, but to individuals. A hospital worker who had helped a friend, a stunt coordinator struggling to pay his mother's bills, a young aspiring actor who couldn't afford rent. No cameras, no announcements, just quiet kindness, passed forward. Still, something felt incomplete. He gave away money, yes, but the feeling that haunted him wasn't about dollars or checks. It was about presence, about the human connection that Franklin had given so freely, without question, on a rainy night. Keanu started reflecting on how many others went unseen. People like Franklin, people who cleaned hallways at night, who worked while others slept, who gave when no one was watching. That thought wouldn't leave him, so he decided to act. He called a friend in documentary filmmaking and floated an idea. What if they created a project that honored unseen workers, not in a grand cinematic way, but by simply letting them speak? Janitors, delivery drivers, cleaners, nurses, people like Franklin. The idea was met with quiet enthusiasm. And so, over time, with his own money and no publicity, Keanu began filming small interviews. He sat with people in their break rooms, their storage closets, their vans. He asked them simple questions. Who are you? What do you dream about? Who sees you? And every time someone answered, he imagined Franklin sitting across from them, nodding along. The project didn't have a name at first. It wasn't meant for Netflix or festivals. Keanu wasn't interested in selling it. He only wanted it to exist. They filmed in quiet corners of New York and Los Angeles. One time in Chicago, another in Boston. Always the same kind of story. A janitor who'd worked the same building for 20 years. A delivery driver who memorized the birthdays of every receptionist on her route. A cafeteria worker who slipped food to homeless teens without ever being caught. Their stories weren't dramatic in the usual sense, but they carried a quiet weight, a kind of dignity rarely given screen time. Keanu sat across from each person, rarely saying much, just listening, letting the silence between answers do its work. He remembered how Franklin had done the same for him. No pressure, no judgment, just presence. When asked why he was doing it, Keanu would only say, "Because someone once did it for me." He never mentioned Franklin's name. Not yet. During those filming days, he found a kind of peace, but at night, the silence returned. And the guilt. The $20 bill still lived inside his journal, now in a glass case beside his writing desk. Keanu would look at it the way some look at heirlooms, not for their monetary worth, but for the soul they carry. He still didn't know how to pay it back. Not really. He began writing a letter to Franklin, even though he didn't know where to send it. Just putting the words on paper made him feel closer to the man. "Dear Franklin," he wrote, "you might not remember me, but I remember everything. The rain, the coffee, the hum in your voice when you spoke about Caleb. I remember the way your eyes softened when you said, 'The world doesn't care who you are, but kindness does.'" He paused, then added, "You didn't just give me shelter, you gave me a way back to myself." He signed it with his name, folded the letter, and slipped it into the back of his journal. Maybe one day he'd find a way to deliver it. Maybe not. But the act of writing it calmed something inside him. Later that year, he decided to dedicate the documentary project to the quiet ones who carry the world. He still didn't want his name attached publicly. No headlines, no red carpets, just the footage, quietly posted online under a pseudonym. Some of the videos gained traction. A few were shared widely, but most just lived on the internet like open doors, waiting for someone to walk through. And in every clip, in every quiet voice, Keanu listened for a trace of Franklin. A phrase, The employee, a story that matched the man who'd once said, "You'll pay me back when it matters." But no one mentioned him. Still, Keanu kept filming, because it mattered. Years passed, and Keanu's life gradually returned to the public eye. He took on a few new roles, quietly resumed film work, and reappeared on magazine covers. But something fundamental in him had changed. His eyes were softer now. His answers in interviews carried a different kind of weight. When asked about fame or fortune, he often redirected the conversation toward gratitude, compassion, or the beauty of quiet work. He never mentioned Franklin by name, but the man's presence could be felt in nearly everything Keanu said. In one interview, when asked how he kept grounded in such a chaotic industry, Keanu paused for a long time. Then he replied, "Someone once showed me that you don't need much to matter. You just need to show up for another person at the right time." It was vague, but those who knew him understood it was personal. During one break in filming, Keanu visited a non-profit center in the Bronx that supported low-income families. He walked in quietly, no press, no handlers, just himself. He listened to the staff, asked questions, and offered to cover a year of funding for janitorial and kitchen staff salaries. Before leaving, he stopped by the staff lounge and handed one of the workers a note. It read, "You matter. What you do is seen." No name was signed. Moments like that became part of his rhythm. Small gestures, anchored by something deeper, something unresolved. At home, his journal remained a private sanctuary. The pages were now filled with reflections, fragments of poems and sketches. But Franklin's page was always the one he returned to. Some nights, Keanu lit a candle and sat beside the framed $20 bill, just breathing. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need the world to know. He just needed to honor what was given to him freely, in the cold, in the dark. As the documentary series grew in quiet popularity, a few filmmakers and artists reached out, asking who was behind it, but Keanu never responded. He didn't want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about people like Franklin, the forgotten, the quiet, the ones who never asked for thanks but gave anyway. In 2010, during a walk through Central Park, Keanu stopped at a bench and watched an older man feed pigeons while a boy sketched them from a distance. The man looked up. Their eyes met for only a second. It wasn't Franklin, but something about the scene, the simplicity, the warmth, the connection, made Keanu sit down and take out his journal. He wrote only one sentence. "I still owe him." He closed the journal and smiled softly. The search wasn't over. It had simply taken a new form. And deep inside, Keanu believed that one day, somehow, the promise would find its way home. It was early spring in Chicago when Keanu arrived to film a low-budget indie project. The script was quiet, the setting minimal, and that's exactly why he had taken it. He needed space, not just in the scenery, but in his spirit. The hotel was modest, tucked between a pair of red brick buildings near Logan Square. The mornings were cold and damp, but peaceful. Most days on set were uneventful. Keanu stayed out of the spotlight between scenes, often sipping tea alone and writing in his journal. He'd long accepted that some parts of his heart would remain unanswered. Franklin was likely gone. The trail had faded, but every now and then, the ache returned. That's what happened on a cloudy Tuesday between takes. The rain had come in suddenly. Crew members rushed to cover the equipment. Keanu stepped back under the tent, shaking droplets off his jacket. Standing nearby was a security guard, no more than 40, watching calmly. They struck up a quiet conversation, mostly about the weather, the traffic, how cold Chicago wind could get. Then Keanu, almost without thinking, asked a question he hadn't asked in years. "Ever meet someone named Franklin Dorsey around here? Older guy, used to work maintenance." The guard blinked, surprised. "You mean Frank Dorsey?" Keanu's heart jumped. "Maybe. You know him?" The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, He volunteers at my cousin's community center in Humboldt Park. Real gentle kind of guy, always humming gospel music. Wears old leather boots and talks about his grandson's art school dreams. Says he used to work nights, kept to himself mostly. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. He smiled faintly. That sounds like the man I knew. You looking for him? Keanu nodded. I've been looking for him for a long time. The security guard scribbled the center's address on a napkin from craft services and handed it over. He's not there every day, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was Wednesday. The next morning, Keanu went alone. No assistant, no publicist, just a hoodie, jeans, and his sketchbook. The community center sat in a converted church building, modest but bright. Children's artwork lined the entryway walls, and the scent of coffee drifted from a small kitchenette near the back. He asked the receptionist if Franklin was there. She checked a clipboard and shook her head. Not today, hon. He'll be in tomorrow morning if his knees don't act up again. Keanu hesitated, then opened his sketchbook. On one of the blank pages, he drew Franklin. The memory was still sharp. His eyes, his shoulders, the tilt of his head when he hummed. He tore out the page, signed his name softly in the corner, and handed it to the woman behind the desk. Would you give this to him? She looked at the sketch, eyes widening. You knew Mr. Dorsey? Keanu just smiled. I owe him something. The next 2 days moved with a strange, suspended quiet. Keanu finished his scenes with the same precision he always brought to work, but his thoughts were somewhere else. At night, he sat near the window of his hotel room, staring at the skyline, sketching without direction. He kept wondering what Franklin looked like now. Was his hair fully gray? Did he still hum when he worked? Did he remember that night as clearly as Keanu did? Or had it become just one small kindness among many? On Friday morning, just after sunrise, there was a knock on the hotel room door. Keanu wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it to find the front desk clerk standing there, holding a manila envelope. This came for you this morning. No return address, just your name written in cursive. Keanu took it gently and thanked him. He sat at the small desk in the corner of the room. The envelope was sealed but thin. Carefully, he peeled it open. Inside was a folded letter and a photo. The letter was written in tidy script, neat, steady, confident. It began simply, I never forgot you either, son. Keanu paused. A tremble moved through his chest. I still remember the look on your face that night. Cold, lost, like the world had emptied out. I didn't know who you were, and I didn't care. You needed someone. That was enough for me. I recognized your name a few years later. I saw your face on a movie poster and thought to myself, that boy made it. But I didn't want to intrude. You had your own road to walk, and so did I. Keanu swallowed, reading slowly now, carefully. Your drawing reached me like a memory waking up. I knew you hadn't forgotten. I always wondered if you would. The letter continued with warmth, humility, and grace. I don't know what you've carried all these years, but if you're still thinking about that $20 bill, let me tell you something. That wasn't charity. That was trust, and from where I stand, son, you paid it back 100 times over. Keanu blinked, his eyes wet. Then he pulled out the photograph. Franklin stood near the edge of a mural painted on a red brick wall, bright colors swirling behind him. His hair was white now, but his frame was familiar. Beside him stood a young man, maybe 20, broad shoulders, bright eyes, and a pencil tucked behind one ear. The back of the photo had a note. Me and Caleb. He got into Pratt Institute, says he's going to be an artist. Keanu smiled, holding the photo close to his chest. For a moment, time folded inward. The cold night, the mop bucket, the hum, the sandwich. All of it lived here, in this photograph, in this moment. He wasn't imagining anymore. Franklin Dorsey was real, still alive, still kind, and still humming somewhere not far away. Keanu read the letter again, this time more slowly, letting each word settle. "I'd love to see you again," it ended. "Same spot as before. Tuesday, 9 a.m., back entrance to the old building. I still mop the floor there twice a week. Some habits don't die easy." It was signed simply, Franklin. Keanu set the letter down and leaned back in his chair. A breath escaped him that he didn't realize he'd been holding for years. After all the time, all the searching, all the dead ends, it came back through something as simple as a conversation, a napkin, and a sketch. He looked at the photograph again. Caleb was the age Keanu had been that night in 1993. There was something poetic in that. The grandson Franklin used to talk about, the one who doodled on napkins and dreamed of murals, had made it. And so had Franklin, not in the way magazines write about, but in the way that mattered. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. Keanu went about his days quietly, but inside something stirred. Hope mixed with nervousness. Would it be the same? Would Franklin even recognize him beyond the films and the fame? Tuesday arrived, crisp and overcast. Keanu wore a simple gray coat and dark jeans, dressed down on purpose. No entourage, no camera crew. He wanted to show up just as he had all those years ago. Humbled, searching, open. He approached the alley beside the old building where they'd first met. It had been renovated, the brick scrubbed clean, new signage hung above, but the soul of the place remained. And there, through the same side window, Keanu saw him. Franklin, head bowed, mop in hand, slowly pushing water across the tile floor. His movements were slower now, maybe a little stiffer, but the same rhythm was there, the same presence, the same soft hum. Keanu knocked gently. Franklin looked up. Their eyes met. This time, Keanu didn't look away. Franklin smiled. The mop stopped moving. He walked to the door, wiped his hands on his pants, and opened it wide. "Took you long enough," he said with a grin. Keanu couldn't help but laugh. It broke the tension, the years, the silence. They embraced. Not with ceremony, but with truth. A handshake that turned into a hug, long and strong. "You look the same," Franklin said, stepping back. "You look better," Keanu replied. Franklin shook his head. "Liar." They both laughed again. Inside, a chair waited beside the mop bucket. Franklin poured them both coffee from a dented thermos. No cameras, no press, just two men, picking up a conversation left hanging for 18 years. "You kept it?" Franklin said after a pause. Keanu nodded. "Every day." "Good," Franklin whispered. "Now let's talk." And they did. Until the sun began to rise and the silence that had lasted nearly 2 decades finally broke open, full of grace, memory, and something deeper than either of them could name. Franklin lived in a modest apartment on the second floor of a weathered building on the west side of Chicago. There were no elevators, so Keanu took the stairs 2 at a time, carrying a small bag of groceries in one hand and Franklin's letter tucked carefully in his coat pocket. The hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. As he reached apartment 2B, he paused. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring at the door, remembering the sound of Franklin's voice, the scrape of his mop, the way he had offered warmth without asking a single question. He knocked. The door opened slowly. Franklin stood there in a soft blue cardigan, his shoulders slightly hunched, but his eyes, those warm, knowing eyes, were sharp as ever. They didn't speak at first. Keanu stepped forward, and Franklin opened his arms. The embrace was long, silent, and full, the kind of hug that speaks more than any greeting ever could. After a moment, Franklin pulled back slightly. "You found your way, son," he said softly. Keanu nodded, swallowing emotion. "Because of you." Inside, the apartment was neat and humble. Faded photographs lined the bookshelf, Angela as a child, then a young woman holding Caleb in her arms. There were sketches on the wall, small ones done in charcoal and watercolor, some rough, some detailed, all of them full of soul. They sat at a small round table near the window. Franklin poured tea from a chipped pot. There was quiet between them, but it was the comfortable kind, the kind shared by people who have known pain, silence, and the slow return of light. Keanu took a sip, then looked out the window for a long moment. "I never said thank you," he finally said. "You didn't have to," Franklin replied, his voice calm. "You lived." They spoke for hours. Keanu shared stories from his journey, his heartbreaks, his films, the loss of River, the grief that never truly left him. Franklin listened, nodding quietly, his hands wrapped around his mug. Then Franklin spoke. He told Keanu about his retirement, the long days that followed, about Angela's passing in 2005, pancreatic cancer, quick and cruel, how Caleb had come to live with him after that, a boy full of questions, full of color and fire, but with no clear path. "He's got his mother's stubbornness," Franklin said, smiling, "and her heart, too." Keanu glanced at one of the sketches on the wall, a young boy staring up at the moon. It stopped him. "Who made that?" Keanu asked. Franklin nodded. "Draws all night, works 2 jobs during the day. Won't let me help, says he'll make his own way." There was pride in Franklin's voice, but also something else. "I never asked you for anything," he said quietly, "back then or now. But if there's anything you could do, maybe you could help him." Keanu placed a hand over Franklin's. "I will," he said softly. But in his heart, he was already planning something much greater than help. The sun had started to dip behind the buildings outside, casting a golden haze into the small kitchen. Franklin moved slowly as he refilled their mugs with warm tea. Keanu offered to help, but Franklin waved him off, still proud of doing things himself, even if his knees didn't quite agree anymore. Keanu stood near the wall of sketches, carefully examining each one. The longer he looked, the more impressed he became. These weren't just the idle doodles of a hobbyist. There was detail, perspective, emotion, especially in the eyes. Each drawing seemed to carry a quiet ache, the kind that only comes from someone who's seen hardship and chosen to create anyway. "This one," Keanu said, pointing to a portrait of a woman seated on a porch, her eyes closed, a soft breeze blowing her hair back. "Is that Angela?" Franklin nodded from the table. "Drawn from memory. Caleb was only 6 when she passed, but he says he can still see her when he closes his eyes." Keanu turned slowly, holding the drawing gently as if it were something sacred. "He's gifted." "Leave." "Ham?" His Franklin said, his voice thick with pride. "But the world doesn't care much about gifts when rents do." Keanu sat back down, this time leaning forward, elbows on the table. "Tell me about him." Franklin smiled. "He's got paint under his nails most days, works as a dishwasher and part-time janitor. Took after me, I guess. But late at night he paints. I hear the scratch of his brushes on canvas from the other room. Doesn't complain, doesn't ask for much, just creates." Whomever tried to sell his work. Franklin shook his head. "Says it's not ready yet. Says art should speak before it sells." Keanu chuckled softly. "He sounds like someone I'd get along with." There was a pause. Then Franklin added, "Sometimes I worry I won't be around long enough to see him make it." Keanu met his eyes and said nothing. He didn't have to. The weight of that sentence lingered in the air, like dust catching sunlight. A few moments later, there was a knock at the door. Franklin looked surprised. "That must be Caleb." Footsteps approached from the hallway and a key rattled in the lock. The door creaked open, and in stepped a tall young man with broad shoulders and a messenger bag slung across his chest. His face lit with curiosity as he noticed the visitor. Franklin stood slowly. "Caleb, this is Mr. Reeves." Caleb's eyes widened. "The actor?" Keanu stood and extended a hand. Just Keanu. Caleb shook it, his grip firm but respectful. I didn't either," Keanu said gently. "But I'm glad I'm here." Franklin watched them both, eyes flickering with something tender. Keanu gestured to the sketches. "Your work is powerful." Caleb looked embarrassed. "It's just practice, nothing serious." "It is serious," Keanu replied, "and it's time someone took it seriously." Caleb sat across from Keanu at the kitchen table, still unsure how to process the moment. The man from the movies, someone he'd only seen through a screen, was here, drinking tea with his grandfather, complimenting his art. It didn't feel real. Franklin sat between them, his hands wrapped around his mug, watching the connection unfold. There was no tension, just curiosity and quiet understanding. Keanu leaned forward. "Do you have a portfolio?" Caleb blinked. "Not really. I've kept most of it here. Some pieces are stored under my bed, and a few are still on canvas boards in the spare room." Keanu smiled. "Would you show me?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a short stack of large sketchbooks and rolled canvases. He laid them on the table, unrolling a few, flipping through others. Scenes of city streets, portraits of strangers, still lifes of worn-out shoes and plastic flowers. Each one carried a distinct emotional weight. The technique was raw but refined. Keanu didn't speak as he flipped through them, only paused every so often to study a detail. How Caleb played with shadows or caught emotion in a facial expression. Finally, he looked up. "These are more than good," he said. "They're honest." Caleb exhaled, half in relief, half in disbelief. "I've never really had anyone outside my grandfather look at them seriously." "Well, I am," Keanu replied, "and I think others should too." Franklin looked over with a faint smile but said nothing. Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out a small black notebook, the same journal he had carried since the 90s. He flipped to the back, where folded papers and notes were tucked like keepsakes. He scribbled something quickly, tore out the page, and slid it across the table. "There's a gallery in Los Angeles. A friend of mine runs it. They specialize in showcasing new, unseen talent, especially artists with stories to tell." Caleb picked up the note. An address, a name, a phone number. "You're serious?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "I'm always serious about art," Keanu said, "and more serious about people who don't give up." Caleb didn't know what to say. His eyes darted to Franklin, who gave him a small nod as if to say, "It's okay to believe this is happening." Keanu stood and looked at them both. "Let's stay in touch. I want to help, but only if you're ready." Caleb stood too. "I'm ready." Franklin rose slowly, joining the two. They stood for a moment. 3 generations of different lives, all linked by a single night. Long ago. Franklin broke the silence. He always told him, "The world doesn't owe you anything, but sometimes kindness finds its way back." Keanu nodded. "It does, and now it's time I return the favor." They embraced again, this time all 3. No words, just quiet, long overdue connection. The next time Keanu visited Chicago, it was unannounced. He wore a hoodie, sunglasses, and the kind of quiet demeanor that let him blend in. He didn't want fanfare. He wanted to see something real. Caleb had mentioned he worked out of a small studio behind a laundromat 2 blocks from their apartment. The space was technically a storage room that the building owner had let him use for a reduced fee, out of pity more than business. It had a cracked window, a leaky pipe in the corner, and paint-stained floor tiles that had seen better decades. But it was Caleb's world. Keanu knocked softly. A voice called out from inside, "Yeah, door's open." He stepped in slowly, not wanting to disrupt. The air smelled of turpentine and coffee. There were canvases stacked against the walls, sketches taped to the fridge, and a small stereo playing something slow and jazzy in the background. Caleb turned around, surprised. "Keanu?" Keanu smiled. "Hope it's okay." Caleb looked genuinely thrilled. "Of course. Sorry, I just wasn't expecting you here." Keanu took a few steps forward, then stopped at the edge of a half-finished painting. It showed a little boy looking through a window streaked with rain. In the reflection, there was a woman smiling faintly. Angela, no doubt. The expression was hauntingly tender. "You painted this from memory?" Keanu asked. Caleb nodded. "I never really knew her, but Grandpa's stories helped. I just imagine what she'd look like when she looked at him." Keanu took in the other works. Cityscapes blurred in movement, portraits of strangers on subways, intimate still lifes of everyday things. A cracked mug, a pair of worn shoes, a child's rubber duck left on a sidewalk. The paintings were emotional without being dramatic. They told stories without shouting. "You see the world in a way most people miss," Keanu said quietly. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "I try, but it's tough. Galleries want names, not nobodies. I've been rejected so many times I stopped applying." Keanu looked around the space once more. Then he pulled out his phone, snapped a few photos of the paintings, and said, "Would you mind if I pass these along to someone I know? No promises, just someone who might appreciate the work?" Caleb shrugged. "Sure. Not like I have much to lose." Keanu left not long after, but something in his heart was already set. He contacted a gallery owner in Chicago he'd met years ago, Ava Moreno, known for her commitment to discovering and promoting young, overlooked artists. Her gallery sat between a bakery and a bookstore on a quiet corner of Logan Square, unassuming but respected. Keanu didn't use Caleb's real name. He didn't want his own involvement to influence anything. He sent Eva the photos under the name C. Dorsey with a simple note: "This young artist deserves a look." His voice is quiet but undeniable. 2 days later, Eva called. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "These paintings feel like someone opened a window into the soul of the city." Keanu smiled. "He paints what he lives." Eva Moreno moved fast. Within a week, she had curated a small exhibit titled City Shadows and Light, featuring 11 of Caleb's pieces. She listed the artist simply as C. Dorsey. No bio, no press, no story, just the work. The opening night was modest, yet somehow magical. People wandered in from the bakery next door, a few gallery regulars stopped by, and some art critics, intrigued by Ava's reputation, took note. By the end of the night, 6 paintings had sold. Within 3 days, they were all gone. Caleb didn't know any of this yet. Keanu had kept it from him, letting the paintings speak for themselves. He wanted Caleb to experience what it meant to be valued, not because of a connection or a favor, but because his work truly moved people. Because it mattered. Then came the envelope. Eva delivered it herself. Inside was a formal letter from the Art Institute of Chicago, offering Caleb a merit-based scholarship to attend their visual arts program. A small pamphlet was included, with his painting of the boy and the rain-streaked window featured on the front cover. It had been selected as the promotional image for the school's upcoming spring showcase. Caleb stared at the papers in silence. His hands shook slightly. Franklin watched from his worn recliner, his eyes never leaving his grandson's face. "I don't understand," Caleb said quietly. "I didn't apply for anything." Eva smiled. "Someone must have believed in you." That evening, Keanu invited Caleb to the gallery's back room. The lights were dimmed, the last guests had left, and the space was quiet. Just the two of them. Caleb held the scholarship letter in his hand, still processing. "This is real, right?" Keanu nodded. "You did this?" "I only opened a door," Keanu said gently. "You walked through it." Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "Your art said everything already." There was a pause, long and thick with emotion. Then Keanu added, "Your grandfather, he didn't just give me shelter. He gave me something I didn't even know I'd lost. Hope. He saw a man drowning and didn't ask for credentials, fame, or payment. Just offered me warmth and a sandwich." Caleb wiped at his eyes. He talks about that night, all the time. Keanu smiled. So do I. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something folded and worn, the same $20 bill Franklin had handed him all those years ago. Caleb recognized it immediately. The handwriting on the corner, the way it had been creased. Lee said you'd pay him back someday, Caleb whispered. I'm trying, Keanu said. But this is just the beginning. Caleb looked up at him, eyes wide and vulnerable. You think I'm ready? I think you've already started, Keanu replied. And now the world gets to see what I saw the moment I walked into that tiny studio. Caleb stepped forward and embraced him. There were no cameras, no press, no spotlight, just gratitude and the silent bond between two people brought together by the quiet mercy of a janitor on a stormy night long ago. The decision came quietly, no grand announcements, no dramatic meetings. Just a quiet morning, Keanu sitting alone in his kitchen, staring at the folded $20.00 bill once again. He placed it beside a photo of Franklin and Caleb that now sat in a simple wooden frame on the counter. That morning, he made the call. Within weeks, a team of lawyers, nonprofit consultants, and longtime collaborators gathered in a private room in Los Angeles. Keanu laid out the vision. It would be personal, direct, not about vanity or visibility. It would focus on real people, essential workers who rarely made headlines, janitors, bus drivers, caretakers, delivery men, dishwashers, people like Franklin Dorsey. I want to create something in his name, Keanu said softly. He didn't just save me that night. He reminded me what kind of man I wanted to become. The lawyers nodded, already sketching out the preliminary documents. The organization would be called the Franklin Dorsey Foundation, with a mission to quietly but powerfully support overlooked workers and their families. The foundation's funding would come from Keanu's own contributions, partnerships with ethical donors, and art fundraising events, starting with Caleb's first public gallery show. The idea wasn't just about charity, it was about dignity. Every mortgage paid off, every medical bill erased, every student debt forgiven. Each act would be handled personally, discreetly, without press releases or cameras. Keanu's instruction was simple. No one needs to know we helped. Just let them breathe again. The foundation launched quietly in the spring of that year. Letters went out to 50 families across the country. One woman, a cafeteria worker in Ohio, opened her envelope and wept at the sight of a stamped notice declaring her debt paid in full. A janitor in Arizona received a check that erased 10 years of back rent. A young girl in Michigan, whose father worked nights as a hospital custodian, found herself suddenly enrolled in college, her tuition fully covered. Each letter bore the same signature at the bottom, the Franklin Dorsey Foundation. In a small apartment in Chicago, Franklin received his letter last. He opened the envelope slowly, unsure of what it could be. Inside was a formal printed sheet with his name across the top and an embossed logo, a mop and bucket crossed behind a sun rising over a city skyline. At the bottom, it read, Dear Mr. Dorsey, your name now stands for hope. This foundation exists because of your kindness. Thank you. Franklin stared at the words, mouth slightly open. His hand trembled as he set the letter down. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Caleb looked up from his sketch pad across the room. Grandpa, what is it? Franklin didn't answer right away. He blinked back tears, then let out a quiet, shaken breath. He named it after me. Caleb walked over, reading the letter over his shoulder. He swallowed hard. Well, he did. Franklin sat back in his chair. I never asked for anything. And yet, Caleb said, placing a hand on his shoulder, you gave everything. A week later, Keanu held a small press event. Not a red carpet gala, not a star-studded launch. Just a modest community hall in South Los Angeles. Folding chairs, coffee and paper cups. A hand-painted banner that read, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Impact. There were no celebrity endorsements. Instead, the room was filled with janitors, retired bus drivers, cleaning staff from local hospitals, and their children. A few reporters attended, but most were unsure what to expect. Keanu stepped onto the small stage in jeans and a black button-up. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need them. He looked out over the room, paused, and said, "I once met a man who gave me a peanut butter sandwich and a cup of coffee. I was lost, cold, broke, and he didn't ask me who I was or what I could do for him. He just helped me." That man's name was Franklin Dorsey. The room fell completely silent. I never forgot him, and I never will. This foundation carries his name because I want the world to remember the kind of man he was. Not famous, not rich, just good. He took a breath. When I asked him once why he helped me, he said, "The world doesn't care who you are, but kindness does." That stayed with me. People in the crowd nodded, some wiping their eyes. Keanu's voice remained steady, but his eyes shone. "This isn't about me. It's about the invisible hands that hold up the world. It's about the people who work night shifts, who clean offices while others sleep, who raise children on minimum wage and still make room for compassion. This is my way of saying thank you." He stepped down, and for a moment no one spoke. Then the applause began. Quiet at first, then swelling until the entire room stood on their feet. Back in Chicago, Franklin watched the live stream on an old laptop. Caleb sat beside him, clutching a sketchbook to his chest. As Keanu's words echoed through the speakers, Franklin's face changed. Not pride exactly, something deeper, something like awe. "I just mopped floors," he whispered. Caleb shook his head. "You saved lives, Grandpa, one small kindness at a time." The following months brought a ripple across the country. More letters went out, more families found relief, medical clinics received anonymous donations, school libraries opened new wings in working-class neighborhoods. The foundation refused to chase credit. Its only goal was impact. And every envelope, every phone call, every grant check bore the same message in small print. In honor of Franklin Dorsey, whose quiet kindness changed the world. One day, Franklin received a package in the mail. Inside was a black, leather-bound journal. His name was embossed on the cover. When he opened it, the first page simply read, "To the man who reminded me who I am, Keanu." The pages that followed were filled with handwritten notes. Stories from people across the country. A father in Texas whose daughter could attend college. A nurse in Boston who no longer had to choose between rent and her medication. A teenage boy in Detroit who finally had art supplies because someone saw his potential. Franklin closed the journal slowly, hands trembling. "This is too much," he said, tears welling up. But Caleb leaned in and said, "No, Grandpa. This is just the world finally seeing what I've always seen." The gallery stood at the corner of a quiet Chicago street, nestled between a bookstore and a laundromat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Brick walls, large front windows, and the smell of freshly dried paint. Inside, spotlights hung from exposed beams, casting soft glows across canvases that vibrated with emotion. Caleb stood in the middle of the room, his heart racing. For the first time, the world would see him, not as a grandson, not as someone's assistant, not as a struggling dreamer, but as an artist. The name on the flyer was his own, Caleb Dorsey, Shelter from the Storm, a debut collection of paintings by a voice shaped by hardship, hope, and unseen hands. Guests began to trickle in, art students, community center regulars, professors from the Art Institute, and some from out of town who had heard whispers about a young talent with a haunting, raw style. Whispers that had started shortly after a mysterious benefactor helped showcase his work in a pop-up gallery the year before. None of them knew the whole story. In one corner, Franklin sat in a wheelchair, his eyes scanning the paintings slowly. His hands rested on the armrests, trembling slightly with age. His favorite sweater was pressed and clean, and Caleb had combed his hair just right. He looked tired, but proud, so proud. Across the room stood Keanu, dressed simply in a blazer over a dark shirt, trying to blend in with the crowd. But of course, people noticed. Whispers passed from one guest to another, eyebrows raised. "Is that Keanu Reeves? What's he doing here?" Caleb's painting said more than any biography could. One canvas, large and centered on the back wall, stopped everyone in their tracks. It depicted a young man, drenched and trembling, standing in the rain outside a dimly lit basement window. The light inside was warm, golden, and just visible through fog and grime. Inside, an older man could be seen faintly through the glass, mopping the floor, unaware of the figure watching from the shadows. The title, "That Night." Viewers stared, quietly moved. Some tilted their heads, others whispered. Keanu stood silently before it, his arms folded, his face unreadable. But his eyes didn't move. They were fixed on the figure of the man in the window, on the memory that had shaped his life. He didn't say a word. Then someone called out to him, "Mr. Reeves." He turned. A journalist with a camera approached gently. "We weren't expecting you here tonight. Are you close to the artist?" Keanu glanced toward Caleb, who was greeting a group of students. Then to Franklin, who was wiping his eyes discreetly. "I suppose you could say that," Keanu said, his voice quiet but steady. The journalist asked, "Can we quote you on why you're here?" Keanu looked back at the painting once more. Then he said, "Because I owe him everything." The reporter blinked. "You mean the artist?" Keanu's gaze lingered a moment longer. Then he turned away and said, "No, the man in the window." The quote, "Because I owe him everything," spread like wildfire. A reporter tweeted it before leaving the gallery. Within an hour, it was reposted thousands of times. By morning, it was a headline across news outlets and trending hashtags. But for those inside the gallery that night, the weight of the words went far beyond virality. As the exhibit progressed, guests wandered from canvas to canvas, each one telling its own quiet story. There was a piece titled "Third Floor East," showing the hallway of a low-income apartment building with peeling wallpaper and a single door left slightly ajar, light spilling out, as if waiting for someone to come home. Another painting, smaller, showed two mugs on a chipped break-room table, steam curling into the air. The title read, "One for me, one for you." But it was the final piece, hung near the exit, that brought tears to more eyes than anyone expected. It was simple. A child's drawing taped to a janitor's locker. Crayon and pencil. The figure was holding a mop in one hand, and the other hand was resting on the shoulder of a tiny boy with wide eyes. Above them was a rainbow. In uneven letters, the words, "Thank you, Grandpa." Franklin sat before that painting the longest. People came up to him, asking quietly if the artwork was about him. He only smiled, nodded once, and whispered, "It's about all of us." Toward the end of the night, Caleb approached him, kneeling down beside the wheelchair. His voice shook. "I tried to paint what I saw in you, in how you looked at the world, what you gave to me, what you gave to him," he said, gesturing toward Keanu across the room. Franklin reached out, taking Caleb's hand in his own. "You did more than that, son. You made the invisible visible. That's art." Keanu joined them moments later. He crouched beside Franklin, the same way he had once sat on a crate sipping coffee in a janitor's room nearly 2 decades ago. "You did this," Keanu told him gently. "All of it started with a sandwich and a door left open." Franklin chuckled, his voice raspy with emotion. "Nah, it started with pain, yours, mine, but we didn't let it make us cruel. We shared the heat of the room." The three of them sat there. No cameras, no audience, just the soft hum of people mingling in the distance and music playing quietly over the speakers. Caleb leaned his head on Franklin's shoulder. Keanu placed a hand over Franklin's, steady and grateful. A photographer from the gallery stepped forward quietly and captured the moment. The photo would later appear in newspapers and online galleries with a simple caption, "A storm, remembered." That night, as the guests departed and the lights dimmed, Caleb stood by the front door, hugging people one by one. Artists, students, teachers. Franklin was wheeled out slowly, bundled in a wool blanket, as the cool spring night settled in. Keanu walked beside him, not saying much, just present. Before stepping into the car, Franklin looked up at the night sky. He smiled and said, "You know what I'd title that one?" Keanu looked up, then at him. "What?" Franklin said, "Peace." And for the first time in a long time, Keanu Reeves believed him. 2 weeks after the art exhibit, Keanu received a package at his home. It came in a weathered brown envelope, sealed neatly with tape and handwritten in delicate script. The return address was Franklin's, but the handwriting wasn't his. Tucked inside was a smaller, cloth-bound journal wrapped in a deep blue scarf. A note rested on top. It read, "Keanu, Marlene always said you'd find this when the time was right. I think the time has come, Franklin." Keanu gently unwrapped the book and turned the cover. Inside, on the first page, were the words, "Marlene Dorsey's journal, for the quiet ones who still believe in good." He sat alone that night in his living room, a soft light glowing beside him, and opened to the next page. What he found was not a diary, but a record of kindness, a quiet testimony. The entries began in the late 1960s. Some were just a few lines, others full paragraphs. All of them chronicled the small, almost invisible ways Franklin had reached out to strangers across decades. Keanu read slowly, absorbing every word. February 3, 1970, Frank gave our last $5 to a man sleeping in the laundromat. He told me, "I'll get it back in warmth." July 19, 1976. A young runaway knocked on our building's back door. Frank let her sleep on the cot in the boiler room. She left a note that said, "Thank you for seeing me." March 8, 1983. A single mother at the grocery store was short at the register. Frank quietly slipped the cashier a 20 and said it was a store promotion. She never knew. Every page brought another act. Not grand gestures, not heroic feats, just quiet, consistent mercy. In one entry, Marlene wrote, "Frank says if he helps one more soul, the world will tilt back toward good." Keanu paused on that line, read it again, then closed the book for a moment, pressing it to his chest. This wasn't just a journal. It was a map of a man's heart, a record of light in the places no spotlight had ever touched. Later that week, Keanu visited Franklin in his apartment. The old man sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching people walk by on the street below. His face lit up when Keanu walked in. "I read it," Keanu said, simply, holding the journal in both hands. Franklin gave a small nod, eyes misty. "She was always better with words than I was." "You never told me," Keanu said. Franklin smiled. "Didn't need to. You were carrying the same torch." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the moment hanging between them. Then Keanu asked, "Would you be okay if the world read this? If others saw what she saw in you?" Franklin hesitated, then looked toward a photo of Marlene on the bookshelf. "If it helps someone," he whispered, "then yes. Let her words keep walking." Keanu left Franklin's apartment that evening with the journal tucked securely under his arm. Back at home, he placed it on his desk and stared at the cover for a long time. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, he made 2 calls. One to his publishing contact, who had helped him release a collection of poems years ago. The second, to the board of the Franklin Dorsey Foundation. He didn't want to make this about celebrity or even about himself. This was about honoring a man whose acts of kindness had rippled across generations, a man whose wife saw those ripples and captured them with grace. Within days, the publisher sent a team to scan and preserve every page. They were astonished by the journal's emotional weight. No edits were needed, no rewrites. The raw entries were enough. They decided to keep it exactly as Marlene had written it. Her handwriting, her voice. The book would be called Tilt the World, The Quiet Legacy of Franklin Dorsey. Keanu wrote the foreword himself. In it, he didn't mention being famous. He didn't talk about movies or red carpets. Instead, he wrote about a night in 1993, about a janitor who opened a door, offered a sandwich, and didn't ask for anything in return. He ended it with these words: "This book isn't about Franklin Dorsey. It's about all the Franklin Dorseys, the ones you walk past, the ones who see you when you're lost, the ones who help without needing to be known. If it weren't for him, I don't know if I'd be here. And if this book helps even one person keep going, then his light is still on." All proceeds, every cent, would go directly to the foundation, now expanding its programs to support education, housing, and mental health services for low-income workers and their families. When Franklin was handed the first printed copy, bound in soft leather, with his and Marlene's names in gold on the cover, he held it to his chest and wept, not out of pride, but out of memory. He whispered her name as he turned each page, sometimes pausing to smile, sometimes closing his eyes for a long time. Caleb was the one who read it cover to cover first. He said it felt like meeting his grandmother for the first time, like hearing her voice in the quiet moments between her words. He began painting again, with a new kind of fire, pieces inspired by each journal entry. One canvas, inspired by the laundromat story, showed a man and a stranger sharing a bench under flickering fluorescent lights. Another, drawn from the grocery store entry, captured a single hand holding out a $20 bill, barely noticeable, in the busy checkout chaos. The book's release went viral within hours. It became a bestseller in 3 countries, translated into 7 languages within the first 3 months. But none of that mattered as much to Keanu as the letters that followed. Thousands of people began writing to the foundation. Letters from janitors, from people who had once been helped by a stranger, from those who said they were about to give up, until they read the journal and decided to keep going. Some letters were just a single sentence. "I saw myself in this. It reminded me of my dad. I'm going to try again." Franklin received a stack of these letters every week. He read them slowly, one by one, then placed them in a wooden box labeled "More Ripples." Keanu visited often, sometimes reading aloud the newest ones. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Chicago skyline, Franklin looked out his window and said, "I thought helping people was just something I did. I didn't know it could become something that lived on." Keanu nodded. "That's what legacies are. Not names in marble, but hearts you leave lit behind you." And in that moment they both knew Marlene's words had done exactly what she hoped. The email came quietly, buried among dozens of others. It was from a well-known international committee, informing Keanu that he had been selected as the recipient of their annual Humanitarian Excellence Award. The honor was prestigious. Previous recipients had included world leaders, Nobel laureates, and renowned philanthropists. The committee praised his transformational commitment to invisible communities and cited the success of the Franklin Dorsey Foundation as one of the most moving philanthropic efforts in the past decade. His assistant printed the email and placed it on Keanu's desk with a sticky note that simply read, "You deserve this." Keanu sat with the letter for a long time. He thought of all the things he could say on that stage, about hardship, about decency, about Franklin. But something didn't sit right. The further he read, the more certain he became of what he had to do. He didn't call a publicist or prepare a speech. Instead, he called the committee's chair directly. "I'm honored," Keanu said, "but I need to ask something different of you." A long pause followed. "I'd like you to give it to someone else," he said. The chair was confused. "Mr. Reeves, this is a Lifetime Achievement Award. There are protocols. We've already announced—" "I know," Keanu said, gently interrupting, "but if this award means anything, it should be about impact. The kind that doesn't need cameras or credits. I have someone in mind." He explained who Franklin was, what he had done, not just for Keanu, but for dozens, possibly hundreds over the years, and how none of it had ever been for show. "I'm not turning it down because I don't care," Keanu said. "I'm turning it down because I care too much. The world needs to hear his voice, just once. Let this be the moment." 3 days later, the committee called back. They had reconsidered. The award would be represented not to Keanu Reeves, but to Franklin Dorsey for a lifetime of quiet service. The televised ceremony was scheduled for the following month at a historic theater in downtown Los Angeles. The event would be broadcast live across multiple networks and live-streamed globally. Invitations went out to celebrities, activists, journalists, and community leaders. Most assumed Keanu would still be accepting. None had heard of Franklin Dorsey. That night, Keanu flew Franklin and Caleb to Los Angeles, arranging everything from their flights to their hotel room. Franklin had never flown before. When he boarded the plane, he gripped the armrests like they were anchor ropes on a ship. Keanu sat beside him the whole way, talking him through the turbulence and helping him laugh at the sky for the first time in years. At the hotel, Caleb helped Franklin into his suit. It was charcoal gray with a soft blue tie, the exact shade of Marlene's scarf that had once wrapped the journal. Franklin wore a small pin on his lapel, a hand gripping another hand. It was the emblem of the foundation. He didn't want anything flashy, just something honest. Backstage at the ceremony, as the final awards were being announced, Franklin looked nervous. "I've never spoken in front of a crowd before," he said. Keanu smiled. "Just speak the way you always have, like you're talking to one soul at a time." The host of the ceremony stepped up to the podium under a cascade of golden light. The crowd leaned in, expecting to hear Keanu Reeves' name announced for the final honor of the night. But instead, the host smiled and said, "This year we recognize not only generosity, but humility. Not only fame, but the power of quiet goodness." He continued, "The recipient of the 2021 Humanitarian Excellence Award is Mr. Franklin Dorsey." A stunned hush swept across the room. Keanu rose first, followed by Caleb, gently guiding Franklin toward the stage. The cameras pivoted. Reporters scrambled to check their notes. Social media lit up with confusion. But as Franklin took slow steps across the stage, one arm hooked into Caleb's, the other resting lightly on Keanu's back, the atmosphere began to shift. Faces in the audience softened, eyes welled. Franklin reached the podium. He looked out across the sea of lights, microphones, and faces. Then he exhaled. "I was just being decent," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "That's all. Decent." He paused, then added, "But sometimes that's enough to change the world." He didn't speak long, just a few simple truths about growing up poor in Alabama, about raising his daughter alone after Marlene passed, about the people who needed help but never knew how to ask, and the people who helped without waiting for applause. "I don't know much about awards," he said, glancing at the trophy now sitting on the podium, "but I know about people, and I know this: someone is always watching. Not with cameras, not with headlines, but with hope. Hoping someone will show them the world isn't cold, that someone sees them." He looked directly at Keanu, and one cold night I opened a door. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed warmth. And that's all we ever need sometimes. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that feels full, sacred. No music played as he stepped down. No one spoke. They just stood, slowly, all at once, and gave him the longest standing ovation of the night. News clips of the speech played across the country. Commentators talked about the humility of a janitor receiving an award meant for the rich and powerful. Twitter exploded with praise. Franklin Dorsey trended worldwide. Celebrities reposted the speech with captions like, "This is what heroism looks like," and "Real greatness." But Franklin didn't return to the spotlight. The next morning, he quietly asked Keanu if they could visit a nearby community garden he'd read about. He said he wanted to give them a donation. "You just won a global award," Keanu said, smiling, "and the first thing you want to do is help someone else?" Franklin shrugged gently. "If you're lucky enough to be seen, use that moment to see others." Keanu looked at him with deep respect. "You could have kept that award, you know," Franklin added as they walked toward the garden gate. Keanu shook his head. "I did keep it. I just kept it where it matters." And with that, they stepped into the garden, sunlight filtering through the trees. No cameras followed. No press recorded it. Just a man who once opened a door and the friend who never forgot. Winter settled over Chicago with a kind of silence that felt heavier than usual. The trees outside Franklin's apartment stood bare, their branches etched against the pale sky like forgotten sketches. Inside, the once lively room now held a stillness marked only by the rhythmic sound of an oxygen machine and the gentle ticking of a wall clock. Keanu Reeves had cleared his schedule. No press, no film sets, no red carpets. Every day, just after sunrise, he stepped into that quiet space with a thermos of tea and a well-worn book tucked under his arm. And every day, Franklin Dorsey greeted him with a faint smile, eyes still bright, though his body was slowing. They didn't always talk. Sometimes Keanu would read aloud, poems, old newspaper clippings, passages from Franklin's late wife's journal. Sometimes they just sat, listening to the soft hum of city life beyond the window. But other times, Franklin would speak. He told stories Keanu had never heard before, about his first job sweeping floors at a train station in Georgia, about how he met Marlene at a church picnic when he was 23 and too nervous to ask for her number, about the day Angela was born and he cried so hard he had to sit down on the hospital floor. Keanu listened, not just out of duty, but because it mattered to him. Franklin's life, once invisible to the world, was now being seen. Fully seen. One afternoon, Franklin asked him, "Do you remember that sandwich?" Keanu nodded, smiling. "Peanut butter, 2 slices of Wonder Bread, wrapped in a napkin." Franklin chuckled softly. "That's the one. You ate it like it was a 5-star meal." "It tasted like hope," Keanu replied. There was a silence after that. Not empty, but full of everything they both felt. Gratitude, memory, a quiet understanding that time was running out. Later that week, Franklin struggled to sit up on his own. Caleb had installed railings and hired a part-time nurse, but Keanu stayed hours beyond the scheduled visits. He began preparing simple meals, reading him the news, holding his hand when the pain made words too difficult. One cold Tuesday morning, with snow brushing against the window pane, Franklin opened his eyes and whispered, "Keanu, I'm here." Franklin turned his head slightly, his gaze fixed but not entirely present. "You paid me back, more than I ever imagined. More than I deserved." Keanu squeezed his hand. "It was never a debt." Franklin's breath caught. He closed his eyes again, his voice barely a whisper. "Promise me one thing. Anything." Franklin's hand trembled in Keanu's. "Never stop helping the ones the world forgets." Keanu didn't respond right away. He looked at Franklin, at the man who once gave him shelter when he had nothing but a soaked jacket and a broken heart. He thought of River Phoenix, of Jennifer, of all the names that lived in his past, like echoes. Then he leaned in closer and said with steady conviction, "I promise." Franklin nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and for the first time in days he smiled. The promise lingered in the room, long after Franklin drifted into sleep. Keanu stayed seated, watching the rise and fall of Franklin's chest, memorizing the rhythm. The way time seemed to slow around this man. It wasn't just the end of a visit. It felt like the closing of something sacred. In the days that followed, Keanu returned again and again. He brought Franklin's favorite records and played them quietly by the window. He read more from Marlene's journal, pausing often when Franklin gestured or added a comment. Sometimes Caleb would join them, his paint-smeared hands resting on his knees as he listened to his grandfather speak about the old days. Franklin spoke more softly now, but every word still carried weight. One morning, as Keanu helped adjust the blankets, Franklin looked up and said, "You turned out all right, you know." Keanu chuckled under his breath. "Took me long enough. You found the good again. That's what matters." Keanu sat beside him, feeling that familiar warmth Franklin always carried, the same one he'd felt that stormy night nearly 2 decades ago. The warmth that didn't judge or measure, just gave. Caleb hung one of his newest paintings on the wall opposite Franklin's bed. It was a quiet piece, a subway station at dawn, janitors pushing carts, a lone figure in the shadows watching with his hands in his pockets. Keanu stared at it for a long while, knowing exactly what it meant. Franklin beamed with pride. "That's his tribute," he whispered, "to all of us who were just trying to make the world a little cleaner." The nurse came in to check vitals, but Franklin gently waved her off. He wasn't in pain that day, just tired. That afternoon, Keanu brought a small box. Inside was the $20 bill. Still folded, still waiting. He placed it on Franklin's nightstand. "I never spent it," Keanu said quietly. "It reminded me of who I wanted to be." Franklin stared at the bill, emotion rising in his eyes. "You became more than I ever imagined." "It started with you," Keanu replied. They sat quietly after that. The hum of the heater, the distant sound of the city beyond the glass, and the faint tapping of Caleb's brush in the other room became their background music. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out something else, a small notebook, the same one from that night. He opened it, turned to the back, and showed Franklin the page. It still had the address Franklin gave him scribbled in shaky handwriting. "Been carrying this with me all this time," Keanu said. Franklin touched the page with trembling fingers. "That means something." Keanu nodded. By evening, the sky outside turned amber. Light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Franklin looked at Keanu one last time that day and said, "Keep your promise, son." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "With everything I have." Franklin closed his eyes and that smile returned, peaceful, content, and full of trust. And for the rest of that night, Keanu stayed by his side, just in case he needed anything. The day after Franklin's passing, Caleb stood in front of a blank wall inside the newly completed Franklin Dorsey Community Center. The wall faced the lobby, tall and curved like a quiet invitation. Light poured through the windows, just like it had on the afternoon Keanu helped cut the ribbon, and said, "This isn't just brick and mortar, it's memory." Now Caleb stared at the empty space, brush in hand, eyes wet but focused. He'd been planning this for weeks, ever since his grandfather's health had started to slip. He hadn't told Keanu what he was going to paint. It felt too personal, too sacred. The mural would speak for itself. He started with deep blues, a stormy sky, a streak of light cutting through gray. Then came the outline of 2 figures, one older, standing firm in a long coat, the other younger, slouched, dripping wet, eyes hollow from grief. The older man's hand extended with a paper cup, coffee. Steam curled into the shape of something like hope. Keanu visited often during those early days of painting. He never asked questions, he simply watched, standing in silence as Caleb worked from morning until late afternoon. Sometimes they would eat lunch together, in folding chairs beneath the mural in grass. Keanu would bring sandwiches or a thermos of tea, but mostly they didn't talk about the mural. They just shared the space the way Franklin might have liked. Quietly, with patience. News of the mural spread quickly through the neighborhood. People dropped by to see the work as it unfolded. Teachers, social workers, kids from the local school. Some remembered Franklin as the man who used to pass out gloves in the winter or hand out school supplies from the back of his car. One elderly woman stood watching for a long time, then whispered to no one in particular, "That man once carried my groceries 6 blocks when my arms gave out. I never even knew his name." Caleb added detail after detail. The sidewalk glistened with rain. The reflection of the two figures shimmered in a puddle below them. A lamp post flickered faintly in the background. He included small touches. A cracked shoelace on the younger man's boot. A mop tucked just out of frame behind the older man, hinting at his quiet profession. It was more than a painting. It was a story, a memory passed down in color. When the mural was complete, Keanu arrived before the crowd that had gathered for the unveiling. Caleb stood beside him, hands stained with color, heart pounding. He pulled back the curtain. Gasps filled the room. There was Franklin, strong, still, shielding a stranger from the storm. At the bottom of the mural, beneath the painted bricks, a small brass plaque was mounted. It read, "To the janitor who changed the world with a cup of coffee." Keanu knelt down and traced the letters with his fingers. He didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, he said, "He didn't ask for this, but he earned every inch." The mural quickly became a landmark. Local newspapers wrote about it. Tourists snapped photos. Students sketched it for art class. And every morning, a janitor at the center would stop and bow his head before beginning his shift, quietly thanking the man whose story now lived on in paint. Months passed, but the mural's meaning only deepened. It became more than a tribute. It became a mirror, reflecting how quiet compassion could change a life, how a janitor, with a mop and a heart full of grace, had sparked a ripple felt decades later. The Franklin Dorsey Community Center flourished. Kids from all over came for tutoring, art lessons, hot meals, and just a safe place to sit. The lobby always hummed with soft conversation, and beneath that mural, people met for the first time, reconciled after arguments, or found quiet shelter from personal storms. Caleb, now a respected artist with several gallery showings, returned every week to teach a free art class. He never charged. He never wanted fame. To him, his success was a continuation of Franklin's work. He always began his classes the same way. "Art," he said, "is about seeing someone, really seeing them. My grandfather saw a stranger in the rain, and that moment became the foundation of everything you see today." Keanu stayed involved quietly. He visited on holidays, helped serve food at community dinners, and once funded the construction of a rooftop garden without asking for credit. Every time he passed the mural, he paused, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for minutes, but always with the same distant, grateful look in his eyes. One winter evening, he brought a small boy named Malik to the center. Malik had recently lost his father and had been skipping school, angry and withdrawn. Keanu met him through a volunteer program. That night, they sat together beneath the mural. Malik looked up and said, "Is that man you?" Keanu hesitated. Then he said, "That man helped me when no one else would." "Did he give you superpowers?" the boy asked. Keanu smiled. "Something like that. He reminded me I mattered." Malik nodded and didn't speak again for a while. But the next week he came back, and the week after that he brought 2 friends. The mural wasn't just paint, it was a doorway. One spring, the city of Chicago issued a proclamation recognizing the mural as a work of public heritage. The mayor visited, took a photo with Keanu and Caleb, and declared the center a beacon of dignity and hope. Caleb added a final touch that day. A tiny figure in the background of the mural, nearly hidden behind a lamppost. A child, watching. It was his way of showing that Franklin's legacy wasn't frozen in one act. It continued, passed from heart to heart, generation to generation. That night, after everyone had left, Keanu returned to the mural one last time before flying back to Los Angeles. He stood in silence. He remembered the cold, the rain, the ache in his bones. He remembered the mop sloshing across the basement floor. He remembered the coffee, the sandwich, the words, "You'll pay me back when it matters." He had, and more. Before leaving, Keanu placed something at the base of the wall, a folded $20 bill, the same one he had carried in his journal for over 30 years. The ink had faded. The corners were soft, but it was still intact. He placed it beneath the plaque, quietly, and whispered, "Debt settled." Then he turned and walked out into the night under a clear sky. 30 years had passed since that rain-soaked night in New York. The world had changed. Keanu had changed. But the echo of one small act, a warm basement, a cup of coffee, a quiet man with a kind heart, never left him. Caleb Dorsey was now a household name in the art world. His exhibitions had traveled from Chicago to Tokyo to Paris. But he always credited his roots. In every interview, every gallery speech, he found a way to mention Franklin. "My grandfather taught me," Caleb would say, "that real art isn't about fame. It's about witnessing people, lifting them." He had expanded the Franklin Dorsey Foundation into a national movement, partnering with schools, shelters, and nonprofits to provide mentorship and grants to aspiring young artists from underserved communities. His signature initiative, Paint It Forward, offered supplies and scholarships to over 10,000 students in the last decade alone. Keanu remained as quiet as ever. Publicly, he was still the humble actor, kind in interviews, known for taking the subway and refusing luxury. But behind the scenes, he was pouring his heart, and much of his wealth, into building something that couldn't be measured on red carpets. Through the foundation, he funded anonymous shelter renovations in Detroit, Miami, and Portland. He bought sleeping bags in bulk and personally delivered them. He paid the salaries of dozens of social workers who'd been let go due to budget cuts. He never asked for attention, never posted about it. In fact, he insisted on contracts with no credit attached. "It's not about me," he once told Caleb. "It never was. It's about what he taught me that night." In 2023, a young filmmaker named Lila Tran approached the foundation with an idea. She wanted to make a documentary not about Keanu or Caleb, but about Franklin, about a janitor who opened a door on a stormy night and unknowingly shifted the course of a stranger's life. Caleb was moved. Keanu was hesitant at first, but after reading Marlene's journal again, he agreed. "If it helps others see the value in kindness," he said, "let's do it." The documentary, titled One Cup of Coffee, The Franklin Dorsey Story, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It opened not with a sweeping introduction, but with the soft sound of rain and the scrape of a mop on linoleum. Lila had found archival footage of the original building, had recreated scenes with quiet reverence, and had interviewed dozens of people Franklin had helped through the years. There was a former addict who said Franklin once left a sandwich and a note on his doorstep every day until he got clean. A single mother who remembered Franklin slipping her an envelope with enough cash to keep her from being evicted. A retired teacher who said Franklin used to call her Queen Eleanor just to make her laugh. The audience wept. They didn't cry because of grandeur or spectacle, but because the story reminded them that the smallest gestures often carry the greatest weight. At the end of the film, a final scene faded in. It was Keanu, older now, wearing a dark sweater and jeans, walking down the steps of the community center built where that old office building once stood. The camera followed him into the reading room. It was the same space, but now filled with light. Children's books lined the walls. There were soft beanbags, shelves of crayons, and cheerful murals. He sat at a small wooden table in the center of the room. Then he reached into a bag and pulled out a cup of coffee. Steam curled up gently from the cup, filling the room with the rich aroma of dark roast. Keanu didn't speak at first. He just looked around the room, his eyes tracing the bright hand-painted stars on the walls, the worn teddy bears in the corner, the laughter echoing faintly from a hallway. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Thank you, Franklin, for everything." He left the cup on the table and stood. In that quiet gesture, one that wasn't meant for the cameras or for the viewers or for history, he had said more than words ever could. When the film ended, audiences across the world sat in silence. Movie critics wrote of the documentary's emotional gravity. Teachers played it in classrooms. Churches and community centers screened it on Sunday nights. A school janitor in Georgia, after watching the film, found a note in his locker the next day that read, "Thank you for being our Franklin." Donations poured into the foundation, but more importantly, something else began to spread. A movement of uncredited kindness. People began to leave anonymous sandwiches in public parks. Others paid for groceries behind them in line. Online forums popped up titled "Be Like Franklin," where people shared stories of helping strangers without expecting recognition. Caleb, now in his 40s, began mentoring young artists full-time. He hosted free weekend workshops for kids whose parents worked long hours. At each workshop, he displayed a single image at the front of the room, a painting of Franklin with a mop in one hand and a lantern in the other. Beneath it, the words, "Kindness lights the way." Keanu never stopped visiting the community center. Sometimes he'd come unannounced, in a hoodie and jeans, just to read books to the children or fix a broken chair. No one ever made a fuss. They just greeted him with warmth, and he'd smile and say, "I'm just here to help." On the 30th anniversary of the night Franklin opened that door, Caleb hosted a commemorative event at the center. Former recipients of the foundation flew in from around the country. Artists, social workers, parents, and children all gathered in the newly built garden courtyard to celebrate the legacy of a man few had met, but all had felt. Keanu gave no speech. Instead, he stepped aside and let others speak. One by one, people stood up to share how Franklin's ripple had reached them. A girl from Baltimore said she got her first sketchbook because of the foundation. A nurse from St. Louis said a grant saved her from eviction while she finished school. A man who once lived on the street said through tears that someone left him coffee and a blanket on his worst night, and now he volunteers weekly, doing the same. The event ended with a simple toast. Caleb raised a ceramic mug with the foundation's logo, Franklin's initials surrounded by brushstrokes, and said, "To the janitor who gave the world more than it ever knew." Keanu held up his own mug and nodded, "To Franklin." They drank. The crowd followed. Somewhere above them, the clouds shifted. A breeze passed through the courtyard. It smelled faintly of rain. As the sun dipped behind the old buildings of Chicago, Keanu stood once more beneath the mural Caleb had painted. It was faded in some parts now, weathered by time and sun, but the image was still clear. Franklin, standing in the rain, offering shelter not just with his hands, but with his heart. And below it, that simple plaque remained, "To the janitor who changed the world with a cup of coffee." Keanu stepped quietly through the front doors of the Franklin Dorsey Community Center. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows installed just the year before, their colors dancing across the polished floors like memories made real. Murals stretched along the walls, portraits of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. A delivery driver handing food to a shivering child. A single mother holding her son's graduation cap. A janitor in a worn brown jacket standing tall beside a young man, both of them caught in a rainstorm of paint and light. Keanu took it all in with soft eyes. No press, no entourage, no cameras. Just him, just the silence, just the echo of a promise kept. Children's laughter echoed from a room down the hall. He walked past the reading nook, where colorful beanbags lined the carpet and shelves overflowed with books. One little girl looked up, her face lighting up as if she recognized him. not for the movies, but for something else. Something kinder. He smiled, nodded, and kept walking. Each step brought him closer to the basement, the room where it had all begun, where he had once stood dripping, shivering, humiliated, and been handed coffee, warmth, and the words that changed his life. Now it was no longer a dark, forgotten space. The basement had been transformed into a cozy reading room, filled with tiny chairs, warm lights, and framed drawings by children from the neighborhood. On the far wall hung Caleb's painting, Shelter from the Storm. The same image from the exhibit, only now surrounded by handprints from every child who had passed through the center. Keanu sat slowly in the same corner where Franklin had first poured him coffee. The old table was still there, refinished, sturdy. A fresh cup of coffee waited, already placed by a staff member who somehow knew Keanu's quiet routine. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small journal, the same one he'd carried for decades, the same one with Franklin's name scribbled on a crumpled page near the back. He opened it, ran his fingers over the fading ink, then closed it again. For a while he just sat there, breathing in the scent of books, paint, and warm coffee. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Thank you, Franklin, for everything." He didn't need more than that. No dramatic monologue, no emotional breakdown. Just that sentence, quiet and whole. It carried the weight of every sleepless night, every hard lesson, every act of kindness that had pulled him from the edge when he didn't even know he needed saving. He stood, left the coffee untouched, and stepped back into the hallway. The world outside would keep moving, but inside this building, a legacy lived on. A voice echoed in his mind, Franklin's, warm and gravelly. The world doesn't care who you are, but kindness does. And that was enough. As Keanu passed the front desk, he glanced one last time at the dedication plaque by the entrance. It read, "In honor of Franklin Dorsey, who believed a cup of coffee could change the world," and proved it. Outside the community center, the city stirred to life. Traffic murmured, sirens called in the distance, and early morning commuters passed by, unaware that just behind those brick walls stood a monument to quiet goodness. Keanu lingered at the sidewalk, watching a young father walk his daughter to the center's front steps. She carried a backpack almost too big for her, a book tucked under one arm, and a wide smile on her face. The father gave her a gentle hug before waving goodbye, then turned and noticed Keanu. They exchanged a silent nod. No fanfare, just recognition. A kind of mutual understanding between two men who knew that showing up mattered more than being seen. Keanu turned and walked the block in silence. A small crowd was already forming down the street, volunteers setting up tables for a food drive organized by the Franklin Dorsey Foundation. He passed them quietly, a hand raised in greeting, and moved on. In a nearby cafe, a television played a clip from the newly released documentary, One Cup of Coffee, The Franklin Dorsey Story. The barista glanced up from steaming milk and caught sight of the footage. Young Keanu Reeves in black and white, standing in the rain, intercut with a present-day Caleb painting a mural. The voiceover from the film said, "You never know how far one act of kindness will ripple, but when it's real, when it's quiet, it keeps echoing." Keanu stepped out of view and into a shaded alley behind the cafe. There, on a brick wall, another mural had appeared, an anonymous piece painted overnight. It showed a steaming cup, held out by a hand with calluses and wrinkles. No face, no background, just the hand and the coffee. Below it, scrawled in white paint, "Be the one who reaches out." He stared at it for a long time, and he smiled. Back inside the community center, Caleb was working with a group of children on a new art project. They were finger-painting kindness stories. Each child asked to draw a moment when someone helped them. One boy drew a picture of his grandmother bringing soup when he was sick. Another sketched a teacher staying late to help him read. A little girl painted two people holding an umbrella together. Caleb paused at that one and looked up toward the mural on the back wall. The one that started it all. As the video cut to its final scene, Keanu's voice played one last time. You may never know whose life you saved with one gentle act, but one day the world will. A piano note lingered in the background, soft and full of promise. Then came the call to action. Has someone's kindness ever changed your life like Franklin changed Keanu's? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of quiet heroes who changed everything. The screen faded to black, and for a moment, silence returned. Gentle, powerful, and full of meaning.